how do you get lesser expensive traffic? Well, that's a good and bad thing. On one hand, it may sound good, but lesser expensive traffic very often with the optimization of these algorithms isn't going to be your best type of customer.
Okay, welcome back to the Marketing Playbook presented by Quad and Bluecore. Here you'll take away 3 game-winning marketing plays every episode to take back to your team. I'm your host, Mark Friedman, and my career has been focused on direct-to-consumer marketing, direct mail, physical retail, and digital commerce. This is episode number 113, and my guest is Ned MacPherson. Ned is now the Chief Growth Officer at Power Digital after having sold his company, Endrock Growth Analytics, to Power Digital. He's full of energy and passion for the work that he does, and he's a subject matter expert in helping brands establish a sound and measurable roadmap for experimentation. He offered us some really interesting insights, so stay tuned and enjoy the show. Before we get started, a quick thank you as always to Max Branstetter of the Wild Business Growth Podcast for producing this episode. You can reach him at max@maxpodcasting.com to help bring your podcast to life. Let's open the playbook. Ready, break. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining the Marketing Playbook podcast. Today, I'm joined by Ned MacPherson. Ned is the Chief Growth Officer and a principal at Power Digital. Power Digital has over 800 employees and is a multidisciplinary digital agency. Ned is the former founder of Endrock Growth Analytics, which was acquired by Power Digital. He's a board member, an angel investor, and an entrepreneur. Ned, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Well, I appreciate you making the time. Interested to get into the details of your career. But for the listeners of the show, we kind of start off with your first story. What might have been in your upbringing where you would have said, geez, this is what my career is going to be?
I didn't necessarily come from a family of traditional entrepreneurs per se, more of traditional finance and such. My brothers went kind of that traditional corporate route. My father was in that, but nonetheless saw, and grew up with a really healthy work ethic around me, if you will, just in terms of how I watched, my brothers, how I watched my father, et cetera, approach kind of their work-life balance. So definitely got a taste of, I guess, a hint of entrepreneurship, if you will, in the earlier years. Really where it started for me was in college. I actually got started with a network marketing business in college, right? Which I know gets a lot of negative connotation out there. Candidly, one of the single best learning experiences I ever had. It was fascinating, right? And I really cut my teeth and sharpened my knife on how to understand the intricacies of marketing. I just ferociously studied things like behavioral psychology, trying to understand how can you warm up to folks to sell them on a concept, how you can keep groups moving together in a single direction. And so I had naturally within that, I was, 19 years old at the time. I had a number of mentors that I looked up to tremendously who were, really big in the company, in the industry, and had a lot of success. And candidly, I started to study books on modeling and mirroring, and again, how you can kind of emulate practices from others around you and whatever it is, any specific domain that you're trying to capitalize on. So I had a couple individuals there that to me, were just as good as it gets when it gets in the entrepreneurial world. So I did everything I could to model, how they acted. I tried to buy the clothes they seem to wear. I tried to speak like they do. And it was funny, for years after that, people would all the time be like, do you know who you sound like? And so it seemed to work, right? Because I used to get kind of confirmation from that. But nonetheless, in the college years, I did that for a couple of years, and it was a great experience, honestly. And I learned a lot. And that kind of opened my eyes up to this like hustling, aggressive style, guerrilla entrepreneurship, right? Which, to me, seeded a lot of kind of the core principles I then took into various ventures that I started down the road, and eventually Endrock, which was, kind of my bigger hit now, of course, with Power Digital.
So you talk a little bit about, how you sell people. You're a little bit of a salesperson, and, you're a subject matter expert. We'll talk about that in a bit. How do you find, everybody's way about selling people on a belief that they have is a little bit different. How do you go about it?
To me, the core angles to it is energy, enthusiasm, and being a domain expert. It really boils down to that, right? So generally, it doesn't matter who I'm talking to. If it's something relating to the services that we provide, the companies that I represent, investments that I've made, or just generally things I'm passionate about, people can very often pick up on, the enthusiasm or the passion that I have for it, which immediately garners attention. And then if I can encapsulate this angle of domain expertise around that attention, that's usually the recipe to get someone to listen to what you have to say. And if you can accomplish that alone, everything else you can kind of figure out as you go along. So, Endrock itself, my main company, what I built and it ended up exiting was predominantly based around data analytics, consumer analytics, and then what's called conversion rate optimization, which is something I really am passionate about, that so many businesses leave huge amounts of revenue on the table because they only optimize for acquisition channels. But once they get into the domain, into the website, into the application, even into the storefront, that behavior or that environment, digital or non, isn't optimized to convert people, to meet them on what they're looking for, to preemptively answer limiting beliefs or questions they may have. And ultimately, if you could do those things, it'll translate into better conversion rates, better sales, better long-term LTVs, et cetera. So I get very passionate about that. And that to me has really been the essence of my salesmanship over the years.
So it's passion and subject matter expertise, domain expertise. Great. We'll come back to the analytics questions in a bit. Let's talk about your, I guess it was your first co-founding experience, a business called Rejuvenetics. What was that?
Yeah, so that was early in the years, about 2 years after college. I was living down here in South Florida in Fort Lauderdale, and some friends of mine who ended up becoming business partners of mine and I jumped into a venture with another kind of known entrepreneur down here in South Florida, and we launched a nutraceutical brand to bring some unique nutraceuticals, the colostrums as an example, different types of nutraceutical products that we built out for health and wellness. And so we ended up building out a kind of network marketing style distribution model to it, which obviously I had experience in. So we ran that for, gosh, I want to say the better part of 3 years or so. I wouldn't call it a failure per se, because we built it up and we were able to support ourselves with salaries. So at the time being 23, 24, 25 years old, that was pretty cool. We ended up growing the company, grew the distributor base, grew the client base. It went well from that perspective. It's certainly not, a household name by any stretch of the imagination. I wouldn't exactly call it a huge, material success as most people would define it. But for us, it was. We put a lot of hard work into it. We grew it, it wasn't until I started to venture in a few other directions and decided to exit from that business, my participation, if you will, that looking back on it, it overall was a good experience. Yeah.
Were there a few things or one thing that was, as you started these businesses, that was harder than you thought it was going to be?
Oh man, where to begin on that? I got my butt kicked with all things financial management, all things building out proper P&L and projections, logistics. I mean, I don't know where to even stop on this. Supply chain management, customer service, you name it. Obviously, things like marketing were always challenging. The one thing I felt I was good at was, again, selling the product almost like belly to belly, just talking passionately about it. And, pretty much everyone I talked to about it became a customer, which was nice. But, how do you scale that? Right. And that was always a challenge. And then candidly, I made a number of other challenging decisions there. I was young and enrolled folks who were frankly just really good friends of mine. And I was like, let's go do this together. And in hindsight, that really wasn't a good idea and likely was a disservice to them more than even to myself, because they weren't necessarily cut out for certain roles that I kind of encouraged them into, right? And we probably shouldn't have done that in hindsight. So, I made a lot of mistakes there, but we did learn a lot. We did grow. We did generate revenue and profits and such. So, there is some degree of a success tale there, but certainly learned a lot on what not to do. That is for sure.
It's interesting. I've asked that question, numerous times over the 5 years that I've done this show, and financial management, or the lack of understanding of building forecasts, understanding the P&L, is one of the answers that comes up most frequently.
Yeah, absolutely. And you don't think about it, I mean, especially when you're a young entrepreneur and you see these really big months you have, and you're like, okay, we're making it. And it's like, you don't realize this invisible tsunami of problems that's coming, because if you can't fulfill that new customer's repeat, that cohort that you just took in, their repeat purchases 60, 90 days down, and you start going out of stock, I mean, among a million other things, you're going to totally, extinguish the excitement, enthusiasm that hard won cohort of new customers is going to have. So, I mean, the list goes on as to challenges, but, we were very naive at that point, and we're excited. And again, we grinded it out, but I wouldn't call it necessarily a really material success.
As you're thinking about businesses to start or ones that you have started, do you kind of focus on a problem that you see the consumer having that you're trying to solve for?
Yeah, totally. And this is something I'm passionate about right now, but where I find people who say the following, I know about that and I know I need to do it or we need to do it, but we haven't yet. That to me is the immediate green flag to jump in. Kind of bring that down to what I mean by it. To this day, people I talk to in the e-commerce space, in the consumer-facing mobile and web application space, you name it, say very similar things to me that they did even 10 years ago, which is, I know we need to study our data. I know we need to clean our analytics up more. I know there's gold in that insight. We just haven't gotten around to doing it, or we haven't found someone to help us with it, fill in the blank, right? That there where you can provide a service to those types of companies to explain that, synthesize that, whatever it may be, is there's gold in that. There's absolute gold in that. It creates a convenience factor for the client. It creates expediency in them getting to their end goals. It brings a whole new element of domain expertise into the equation that they don't already necessarily have, et cetera. It's not all that dissimilar to people in the early days would be like, hey, what's this Facebook marketing thing, back in 2012, 13, 14. And, these folks would come along and say, we can manage that for you, and kind of being on the cutting edge. And actually to this day, that's kind of the essence of digital marketing agencies is perspective media. So
Today's marketers are facing complexity in their day to day work, and that complexity is making it harder to deliver real business value. However, teams that find a way to streamline their work are the happiest and most productive. Quad partnered with Harvard Business Review Analytic Services to find out why today's marketers are so overwhelmed and what to do about it. Head over to quad.com/HBR to read more. So you did a few different things before you started Endrock, but let's jump to Endrock because I think that's a really interesting experience. Talk about what Endrock was, what got you into the business, and the problem that you felt like you could solve for people.
yeah, sure, sure. So, kind of as mentioned before, I found a number of companies that weren't really operating on clean data architectures and didn't really know how to understand what their data was telling them. And, from that, I started to do some free consultation on the side and saw a lot of demand. And basically, one of my initial clients, if you will, who I was doing this for free for, said, could we get more of you? Could we get more of your time? Could you do this more? What if we paid you? And they threw a number out, and that became my first level, basically billing them out. So I did it, and they were a non-for-profit actually here in South Florida, in basically selling tickets to concerts of a specific type. And they had their best concert in the history of the organization that winter. And I remember being like, okay, there's something here. Like, we're getting material success on this. So I got referred to another group from them. The executive director of that group signed another client, so on and so forth. And I kind of turned into this individual who was your ad hoc experiment guy. And what I mean by that is I would come into the business, take a look at your analytics architecture, and come up with different empirical points we could experiment against. As an example, fundamental things like landing pages on your website, why some of them converted better than others, generating good empirically backed hypotheses as to why landing page 6 trumped landing page 2, whatever. And then using that data and kind of that experiment methodology to then say, well, what if we tried this? What if we tried that? And just continuously experimenting within the client's website or their app or their email automations or their message structures, their ads themselves, if you will, like the copy, the creative. And that kind of, just scientific method style of experimentation just worked, and I started to see a lot of success with clients, and eventually got to a point where I maxed out my client book. I couldn't reasonably take on anymore, and things were going quite well. And I ran that for about 2 years before I decided to create an agency and say, okay, I'm going to find a scalable model for this. So that's when I did. And of course, there's a lot of things that happened along the way there I'm not discussing, but overall, I learned a lot about what growth means in my interpretation, right? Empirical backed experimentation, and started an agency. And candidly, we just scaled really fast. My first hire was January 2019. And, when we exited December 23, we were about 120 people on the team. All from organic growth, all referral, existing client referral was the majority of it, channel partners, things like that. But yeah, so it was and it continues on today. Obviously Endrock is now part of Power Digital, and I'm managing that along as chief growth officer role for Power. So, but yeah, that's effectively the journey.
You mentioned, I was reading on LinkedIn that Enrock wasn't so much a marketing agency, but a growth team. What's the distinction between the two?
Yeah, great question. So a marketing team typically sits within the entire life cycle of the funnel. And what I mean by that is they discuss a lot about creating awareness among consumers out there, creating acquisition strategies, yes, conversion strategies, but then even post-click repeat rates, right? Referral engines, things like that. A growth team falls within the marketing division. However, it has a very specific, in my interpretation of golf, a very specific remit, which is experimentation, running thoughtful experiments, right? The idea is it's effectively a multi-step circle where point one is you pick a metric, and we call it the metric that matters or the metric on fire. Usually you pick a few of them, but you call just one. This might be something like iOS using top DMA living cart to checkout rates on a website. For whatever reason, it's statistically lower than this brand's competitors, e-commerce in general, all the other metrics on the website. And you say, that's interesting. That metric stands out. There's a problem there. You then go into step two, which is now you start to ideate, which is a very unbridled, candidly, role where it's your ideas, it's my ideas, it's strangers' ideas, it's customers of the brand. It's everybody kind of throws ideas in as to why that progression rate at that step of the funnel might be weak. Then you go into a nomination process where you hone that down to say, okay, legitimately of these ideas, which ones are we most confident in? Which ones are actually going to create an impact? Which ones can we feasibly even do, right? Easily. You nominate your top 1 to 3, and then you execute. You design an experiment, you build an experiment. In e-com, as an example, that usually involves design work and development work. You push it live, you run, as an example, an A/B test or a multivariate test, and then you have a readout. And if you move the needle, you move on to the next metric. If you didn't, you go back to the drawing board. And that cycle is just candidly rinse and repeat up and down the brand's ecosystem. So whereas it's very tangentially related to marketing, it's hyper empirical and it's very experiment oriented. So to me, that's what growth means. And not to go on a tangent here, but growth to me is a derivative of growth hacker, which came from Sean Ellis coined that term back in, I don't know, when 2008, 2009, 2010, as a cool name for his process. I think he was at Airbnb at the time, or maybe he was Eventbrite, running experimentation, basically to prove conversion rates and opt-in rates. So that got, to me, condensed down to growth. And then now growth, I mean, people use it for all different terms, but that's what it means to me and why I've always stuck with that.
Do you find that some clients now, or even back when you had Enrock as a standalone, they're not really sure what to test, and they wind up testing for testing's sake as opposed to those things that are really going to potentially move the needle, the big swings, if you will?
Yeah, total. I mean, the biggest consideration is the hippo syndrome, highest paid person in the room's opinion, which is, the CEO or the whomever, whatever, the vice president of this or the CMO or whatever, says, well, this is what we want to do, or I think we should do that. And, folks don't feel, and I understand why, they don't feel comfortable necessarily negating that or pushing back on that point. So you end up actually, ironically, using a very non-scientific approach, and you just land on an idea, and then you got a whole group of people go execute on it. And then to make matters worse, there's very little true analytics that comes out of that to be like, did it work? Did we learn anything from that? Then you just move on to the next thing that one person or group of people thinks is the best route. And like a classic example of this, I cannot tell you how many times I will audit a site. And one of the first things a client will say to me is like, well, we already know, we need to do stuff on the homepage. We got a whole new homepage coming together. And I'll stop them mid-sentence like, well, I just pulled your data and your homepage progression rate is one of the best performing on the site. Like, why would you focus there when you've got all these other issues, for instance, on the PDP, on the collection page, product page, checkout page, and you want to redo the homepage, which is ironically your best performing asset? That doesn't make a lot of sense because they don't use the data often to drive decisions. So yes, I mean, you see this very almost like blindfolded approach that most brands take. And, that's what I'm passionate about pivoting them off of, is using empirical modeling to make those decisions and not subjective.
You talk about measurement, and that was something I wanted to ask about. How do you help brands measure their performance? Because part of it is assimilating the data, getting the data and then interpreting the data and then deciding, all right, what are we going to do with that? So, how are you and your teams, thinking about helping your clients in that way?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it all starts with relying on what they have in terms of tooling and what they have in terms of their data architecture and their stack. And first off, educating them on what it means. And so that's just as much on what the incremental metrics mean and what all the reports and something as fundamental as Google Analytics 4 mean. But it also means leveraging my, at this point now, decades of experience doing this and the 1,000 to 2,000 brands of analytics access I have. So if I'm talking to, for instance, a fashion brand or a beauty brand or a CPG food-based brand or what have you, I mean, I have usually hundreds and hundreds of other brands that are either competitive or tangentially similar enough that I can say in this spectrum of where other brands for their new acquired user from organic search queries, they convert at this step here, whereas you are X% lower than the mean. Therefore, that's again using empirical methodology to say that is an area that's weak. It's not just my opinion, it's quantitative and it's backed. So step one is, to your point, is really getting them educated on where do we even stand. And I've had brands that come to me that have done, they're doing 100 million, 200 plus million a year on their website who aren't really sure if their add to cart rate on their best link PDP is good or not. Like, where does it stand? Is it top decile, bottom? They really don't know. And that's understandable. So once again, that's something I can provide and then get them on board with that so that we can all move into this experimentation protocol together based on that data.
When clients come to you, what's their one or two most the single biggest question that they ask you? They come to you for a reason. What are they struggling with that they're hoping you're going to solve?
Yeah. So, I mean, the main one they'll come to me is they'll use a very generic statement, say our conversion rate's lower than it should be. Right. And it's like there's a lot to unpack in that statement. So when you say conversion rate, let's unpack that. What do you mean? Do you mean brand new users, first time purchase? Do you mean all users? Are we factoring in, February of 2023 cohort here? Or is this just January 2025 acquired new folks? Are we talking about all channels? Is this organic search? Is this paid media? Is it both? Like, what are we talking about? Like, do you sell bundles? How about subscription versus one time? These are all varying factors that go into a conversion equation. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is that should concept, going back to my former point, which is like, well, is it low? Are you sure? Right. And I'm not by any means saying that it isn't, but why do you think it's low and where specifically? So a lot of times they'll just look in their analytics and see this arbitrary number, 0.8% conversion rate, 1.7, 3.2. And they'll just, for whatever reason, say that's low, right? And I appreciate, on one hand, the fact that they want to constantly get better because it's like I'm of that mindset too. But on the other hand, it's like, let's bring this back down to earth and understand legitimately how far can you move this metric, right? Compared to other brands, compared to the intersection of your average order value, your traffic distribution, right? Channel composition mix, all of these things. And then starting to get candidly into more complex things like what is the tapestry analysis on your consumer archetypes? Do you have a highly price elastic or inelastic consumer base? That's going to impact your conversion rate. So all of these things come into play to answer what is fundamentally to them just a kind of generic problem they think they have, which is my conversion rate seems to be too low.
You build Endrock up at some moment in time, either Power Digital comes to you, you go to Power Digital, however that worked out. How did you know it was time to exit that business and become part of something that was a little bit larger?
Yeah, candidly, I wish I could say this was premeditated. It wasn't. It was not the plan to exit by any means. I had gotten connected to a banker in the space with another deal I was keen on doing, and that banker took a hard look at the company and said, I know this wasn't your intention, but would you ever be interested in entertaining potential offers from private equity or larger strategics? I think you've got something really valuable here. And we discussed it, and the banker I work with was tremendous. Can't recommend him enough. He was very patient with me and answered a lot of questions. And I really got an MBA, honestly, in the whole early stage or mid stage agency M&A process. But he helped me walk through it. And then he had a really good comment, which he's like, look, if we go not to market, but we start entertaining some of these LOIs, worst case scenario, they're going to highlight quite bluntly where you're weak and what you need to work on. And that's tremendous education for you to now go back and what a win-win, right? There's really nothing to it. So I had some understandings as to what I thought the agency was worth and what I wanted to see in terms of a structure and how I wanted to see my team taken care of. And, we got some excellent offers, and one of them really kind of rose to the top, obviously Power Digital, and exceeded, my expectation. And, Yeah. And then all of a sudden we were selling just like that.
You sell and now you become part of a larger organization. So how has your role changed from, day-to-day running of a business, and now maybe it's a division within Power Digital? Why don't you explain how that lays out?
Yeah, I mean, like most folks would imagine, a lot was taken off my plate. I kind of was the pseudo HR department for a while. I had an excellent fractional CFO, but I was effectively overseeing finance every day. So a lot of that, just blocking and tackling within the business got taken off my plate, which was a massive relief, right? So that's kind of number one. Number two is the things that matter most, right? My most important things I'd focus on every day, with the exception of some of the finance bits, I'm still doing today, which is how many audits am I presenting? I do those complimentary audits so I can show folks how we operate. How many audits am I scheduling? How many am I completing? What is my conversion rate on those? How are my clients launching? How is my team doing in terms of managing deliveries?
What do you mean by conversion rate, Ned?
My conversion rate. So that would be, yes, yeah, good. I like it. Mine would be the conversion rate of audit presentations to a signed contract. Yes, yes. No, it's a good call out though. And so I still get to focus on that, right? And that is my still primary kind of remit, to make sure that we're growing the CRO product and the experimentation product within Power. And then simultaneously being the chief growth officer, I'm also taking my learnings from growing, it was a very fast growing agency, and finding ways that we can cross pollinate via service expansion into some of our other divisions here at Power, but then at the same time, keep us on a good accelerated growth path for Power on the whole, right? Which is, efficiencies within the business as well as new sales tactics. And Power's got a tremendous exec team, right? So there's a lot of firepower there that I get to, fortunate to work alongside of.
So there may be some folks, Power was new to me only about a year ago. There may be some folks that don't know Power Digital. Maybe talk a bit about scope of services and capabilities that they bring.
Yeah, of course. So it is we're about an 800 plus person agency now. We've got offices throughout the United States, Latin America, clients around the world, fast scaling agency, and effectively providing all of the fundamental channel supports for a direct to consumer or a B2B style business. So the classic, organic search, SEO optimization, content, creative, data intelligence, strategic consulting, conversion rate optimization, paid search, paid media, affiliate, influencer, et cetera, PR, list kind of goes on there. So all the fundamental services that a typical go-to-market or B2C or B2B brand would rely on to help expand their business and their revenue in a heavily digitally native world, or even digitally centric in some of their cases world. That's what Power provides. And exceptional talent within that team. As I got to know folks during the due diligence process, it became very clear that we were upping our game getting involved with Power. I mean, just really, really solid folks in every one of the divisions. So to me, it's no kidding. I know a lot of mid and large scale agencies have really struggled in the last 2 years. Whereas we haven't. We've shown single and double digit growth in the last 2 years, depending on which year you look at. And so we've had great success, especially with a lot of headwinds out there in the market. So Power has a variety of different Fortune 50, Fortune 500 clients, which kind of speaks to its success over the years.
I sat through an audit that you did for a client, which is where we met. It was really well done. There was lots of information to think through. When you win business, either that audit contributing to win it, how then do you kind of bring it full circle? How do you embrace that audit and kind of help prioritize what needs to get done first with the client?
Sure, absolutely. Well, just kind of taking my own medicine. If you recall, within that audit, we went through intrafunnel measurements, right? So we talked about where you were seeing unusually high or good drop off rates, churn rates as users move through that funnel. So going back to take my own medicine, it's like, where do we start? Well, where are our metrics on fire? And I don't recall exactly which ones they were in that audit, but depending on where it was, call it the cart to checkout rate, those ideas revolving around improving that rate specifically. Or I believe there were some AOV concepts in that audit too, where I felt like we were really, had some good upward movement on the unit per transaction counts, average order value production, anything relating to those tactics would be prioritized. Not that the other ideas wouldn't work, they likely would, but in this case, we're going to get a better return on investment because the metric is struggling, right? In that case, that it's, a cart metric is, or an idea is addressing. So that's how we would start. And then rinse and repeat, as I mentioned before, from there, run experimentation, We're typically running 4, 5, 6, 7 experiments a month on a client's brand. And then from there, we'll move off a metric. If we moved it, we'll just keep hammering on it till we move it. And it kind of comes full circle with the ideation and analysis process.
You get to see a lot of brands. I get to see a lot, but not nearly as many as you do. It's always been amazing to me, the commonality of the challenges that, so many of these brands face. If you had to boil it down to, one or two things, what stands out among those commonalities?
Yeah, I mean, the majority of brands have either poured tremendous seed capital or raised capital, and they're pouring that into acquisition efforts via, unfortunately, increasingly growing CPAs, cost per acquisitions, which is, Meta as an example, Google. And so probably the single biggest struggle that really every one of these brands is struggling with is that CAC to LTV ratio, right? So that ratio of their customer acquisition costs to the ultimate LTV that acquired unit or that acquired customer is going to be predictably generating for the company. So that being said, there's a lot of dials in that statement I just said that you can turn. The most obvious would be, how do you get lesser expensive traffic? Well, that's a good and bad thing. On one hand, it may sound good, but lesser expensive traffic very often with the optimization of these algorithms isn't going to be your best type of customer. So whereas you might be clipping the upfront cost on the first purchase unit economic, you're now clipping the wings of the repeat purchase and thus the LTV. So are you really winning? That ratio will tell you that. So that's probably the number one problem I see is, how do we improve that CAC to LTV ratio? And by the way, conversion rate optimization is a major contributor to that. The second big one is understanding wasted ad spend and incrementality. So classic example, we just deployed $20,000, $100,000, whatever, $500,000 in this awareness campaign over X months on Google, on Meta, on TikTok, on Pinterest, you name it. And then there's that age-old marketing question: did it do anything? If so, where and for whom? And so one of the things that Power does an excellent job at is incrementality analyses, right? To determine what is the true return on that dollar spend, full cycle, right? Those two, I would say, are disproportionately the largest questions I see, and where a lot of brands are really pleading for help on.
How do smaller brands, deal with this issue of incrementality testing? If you're a larger brand, however we want to define it, and there's enough spend out there to really be able to get stat sig, statistical significance, relatively quickly. But if you're a smaller brand, you're doing $1 million or $2 or $3 or $4 or $5 million, and your paid media, is controlled. Can you figure that out about incrementality?
Scientifically, it's hard, but and this is going to be the most non-scientific thing I'm going to say in this whole episode. There's a finger in the wind strategy that gets pretty close with small brands. And what I mean by that, I've had a number of clients that out of nowhere on a random Tuesday, their revenue spiked and went up 3x that day. And they're calling me, we have no idea. It doesn't seem to be coming from the ads. Maybe a celebrity posted about it, et cetera. And so you start poking around. And because those brands are smaller, there's only so many hits that you get when you're searching for them. There's only so many people talking about it. So you can kind of back in oh, wow, this magazine article just got published, or this Substack from this really popular influencer just went out and it links to our site, or this, again, celebrity just said this on social. And so you can start to piece together the patterns with small companies, because you don't have 1,000 doors. You're not in retail yet, usually. A lot of these brands aren't even e-com and Amazon. They're one or the other. So you've got less exogenous noise going on. And so because of that, you can, again, finger in the wind, kind of trace this random or arbitrary spike in revenue to this other event that just happened last night or this morning, et cetera. And you can kind of connect the dots. Now, of course, dollars spent on awareness, how does that translate 6 months, 12 months, 18 months down the road? That's really hard when you're an early stage brand. But bigger moves, you can start to get the idea and then invest in those channels. Hey, let's get an influencer program going. Let's, this Substack link seemed to do well. Let's go find more of those, right? Or can we push a harder traditional PR move here? So you get some ideas based on blips that you'll see in the early days.
Really interesting stuff. And, you said this at the beginning, your passion and your excitement about the things that you're talking about, really exude confidence. And, I think it resonates with people. So good stuff. Leading retail brands are seeing 3-year customer retention rates that average 59%, while the industry average is only 22%. What makes the difference? It's a philosophy and framework called customer movement. Customer movement centers your strategy on customers rather than channels. It's the practice of understanding customer value and moving shoppers through the life cycle more often and more efficiently. From unknown visitors to known shoppers, from non-buyers to new buyers, from one-time buyers to repeat, and re-engaging those who threaten to slip through the cracks. Bluecore is the retail marketing technology behind customer movement, working with more than 400 leading retailers and D2C brands such as Gap, Neiman Marcus, Carhartt, and Tapestry. Learn more about customer movement and how to create a more active, profitable customer base at bluecore.com. We're at the end of the show. We do a 2-minute drill, 7 questions, 1-word answer. Are you ready?
Ready.
Okay. A brand that you admire or that inspires you.
True Classic Teas.
Favorite app on your phone.
Particle.
Last website other than Amazon that you shopped from.
Huel.
Something that you're not good at, but wish that you were.
Understanding my tax bill. Singing.
Okay. Charitable organization that you're passionate about.
Homeless youth of South Florida.
If you had one superpower, what would it be?
Oh, easy. Not having to sleep.
Other than family, what's your most prized possession?
My cars or my golf clubs.
I had a feeling golf clubs were going to come out. Where can people reach out to you on social media, Ned, if they want to?
LinkedIn works great. Feel free to shoot me an email directly, ned@powerdigital.com. But otherwise, LinkedIn's usually fine.
Okay, great. Well, look, I should have wished you Happy New Year when we started the show, but Happy New Year. Thanks for giving me the time. Really interesting stuff, and continued success at Power Digital.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark. I appreciate it.
That's it. Today's game ball goes to Ned MacPherson for coming on the Marketing Playbook. To me, today's 3 game-winning marketing plays were as follows. Number 1. The opportunity to sell a business you've created does not come along very often. As you heard Ned mention, even though he wasn't looking to sell, he used the opportunity to meet with people and have them discuss his business, the good and the areas that they thought needed improvement. He used that process as a learning experience to get better. And number 2, if you have an idea for a business, run with it, but realize that you need help. I've heard so many times from entrepreneurs that they had no idea how hard it would be. They all expected to work hard, but many did not know what they did not know. And as Ned explained, he wished that he had a stronger financial acumen early in his career. So for all of those listeners that are early in their career, make sure you get some education in building a financial forecast and learn how to read and develop a P&L. And number 3, if you're running a digital business, you must have a well-thought-out testing roadmap from which to work. Create your experiments with a clear game plan of what you're testing and how you'll measure performance. And just because you can test something doesn't mean that you should. Take big swings so that if you get a favorable result, it can really help move your business forward. Thank you, Playbook marketers, for listening to another episode. If you want to check out more pages of the Marketing Playbook, make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast spot and leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Until next time, the devil is in the details.